あ、ウルトラマンだ。 M78 星雲の宇宙人からその命を託された速さ隊員です。頑張って。新彗星は本当に地球とぶつかるんですか？
地球は絶対大丈夫よ。
計算によると水星追放が同じ軌道を通って再び地球に近づき、今度は地球と衝突するんだ。3026年7月2日午前8時。しかし人類はその時想像もつかないような優れた科学を持ち、追放の軌道を変えることもできるだろうな。だろうね。
Well, what did you think of that, students? And we're only just getting started with this 25K subscriber special. I want to give a big thank you to my super talented brother, or should I say Ultra Brother, for providing the incredible 3D animation shown in the second half of that trailer. I'm super excited about how it turned out. And of course, a big thank you to all of you amazing students watching at home for helping this channel reach the astounding 25K subs milestone. I mean, I just can't wrap my head around the fact that there are 25,000 of you out there who are signed up to regularly watch my content. That's just incredible. Big milestones call for big celebrations, so today I'm finally going to reveal the details of my fanfiction Ultraman show, Ultraman Brave, the series I would put out if I were a director at Tsuburaya Productions. I've been planning this series out in secret for months, and I'm super excited to share it with you all. Now you may be wondering, since this show isn't real, what are you going to put up on the screen while describing this series? Well, I'm excited to report that many of you submitted amazing art of Ultraman Brave, and I will be showing it all off while going over my planned series, along with a few images of my own, in what will basically be another art show like the one I held last year, which you all seem to enjoy. Alright, let's get the party started. Please welcome Ultraman Brave. So, as you could probably tell from the trailer, this show takes place in the year 3026, the exact year that the comet Suifon was predicted to return and destroy Earth in the 25th episode of the original Ultraman series. And, if it were somehow possible to complete the show in time, Ultraman Brave would air on TV in the rapidly approaching year of 2026, which is not only the year exactly 1,000 years before Suifon's return, but also the year that both Ultra Q and Ultraman, the first two Ultra series shows, will be turning 60 years old. When I realized how well this all lined up, I mean, it was hard to believe. All of that is coming in 2026. I'm of course not expecting Tsuburaya Productions to ever even hear about this show concept, especially not in time to use it in 2026. But if any Tsuburaya employees are out there listening, feel free to use anything I'll be talking about today before time runs out. It would just be so perfect. Since my show is supposed to air in a huge anniversary year for the Ultra series, especially Ultra Q and Ultraman, I decided to make my show into a celebration of the entire franchise, especially those first two shows, which Ultraman Brave is a direct sequel to. You'll see how momentarily. It takes place 1,000 years in the future, and mankind has forgotten the Ultra Warriors and considers them to be a myth. At some point between 2026 and 3026, humanity went through a nearly apocalyptic event, and rather than advancing in technology as Captain Muramatsu predicted, this disaster sent humanity almost back to square one, and wiped most everyone from the globe, with the people of Japan being the only survivors. However, several hundred years have passed since this cataclysmic event, and now, in a Twilight Zone-like way, or should I say in an Ultra Q-like way, because that's the feel I'm going for here, somehow technology has gone back exactly to where it was in the 1960s, when Ultra Q and Ultraman aired, and everything in Japan is eerily similar to how it was back then. Now you may be wondering, why didn't the Ultra Heroes come to humanity's aid when this disaster struck? Well, in the year 2200 or so, a mysterious barrier of deadly red particles known by astronomers as the blood field, trillions and trillions of miles long, said to appear to announce the destruction of a planet, suddenly materialized outside our solar system, effectively sealing us off from the rest of the universe. No Ultra dared attempt to travel through this wall of death for hundreds of years, that is, until the year 3025. The Ultras know the universe well and recognize that within a year the comet Suifon would destroy the Earth if they did nothing. A young Ultra, a student of the original Ultraman, similar to how Zett is Ultraman Zero's student, volunteered to put his life in tremendous peril and attempt to journey through the blood field in his travel sphere, in a desperate attempt to reach the Earth and assist humanity in their time of need. For this courageous act, prior to his departure, he was awarded 2 star medals by his brothers in arms. Yes, he's an Ultra brother, and after receiving permission from the father of Ultra, he set out on his near-impossible mission. This Ultra is of course Ultraman Brave, who I designed to resemble the first 5 Ultra brothers. He is heavily based on a discarded design by Toll Narita of the original Ultraman, and receives 2 star medals like those of Zoffi. On his shoulder is his main weapon, the Knuckle Reaver, which is of course based on Ultraseven's Eye Slugger, and is used in much the same way. However, Brave also likes to use his powers to bind the weapon to his hand, and use it to perform a devastating uppercut, which he often uses as a finishing move. Also, Brave has several pinstripes on his body like Ultraman Jack, and his head shape is similar to that of Ultraman Ace. Like his teacher Ultraman, Brave has an A, B, and C type form. Hopefully this would help satisfy Bandai, who always want to make tons of toys. I chose Ultraman Brave as this hero's name because I thought it matched well with those of the Showa heroes, and the name choice actually ended up inspiring the plot of the show quite a bit, as I chose courage to be basically the main theme of the show. So, how does Ultraman Brave fare in his mission to reach the Earth? Well, it doesn't go well at all. While he does make it through the blood field, the hero is hurt so badly in the process that he basically ends up dying of his injuries mid-flight, and his travel sphere crash lands on Earth with the lifeless Ultra inside. Now I'm sure you're all assuming that he somehow comes back to life and are wondering how. And my response to that is, you could be right, but we'll get back to Ultraman Brave in a little bit. For now, let's catch up on some other stuff, like on who the main human character of the show is. Do you guys remember Isamu Hoshino, the kid character from the original Ultraman who ended up joining the SSSP? If so, you may be aware that midway through Ultraman, he just vanished and was not seen in any more episodes. Well, Ultraman Brave completes his story. Soon after being named an official SSSP member, Hoshino went to study at the organization's main headquarters in Paris. However, as we know, the SSSP was eventually disbanded and reorganized as the TDF, and when this shakeup occurred, Hoshino returned to Japan, got married, and devoted his life to researching kaiju biology, occasionally working with whatever defense team was active. In Hoshino's later years, he was paid a visit by an elderly Hayata who was close to death. None of Hayata's friends had seen him for many years, because sometime after Farewell Ultraman, the former SSSP member had reunited with the first Ultra hero and spent the rest of his life battling threats across the universe. But now, in his last hours, Hayata had said his farewells to the Ultra that saved his life long ago, and had returned to his home planet to die peacefully. Before passing away, Hayata informed Hoshino of all that had happened, and gave him the Beta Capsule, describing it as a gift from Ultraman, and informing him that humanity may someday have need of it again. So, Hoshino's family buried Hayata and took charge of guarding the Beta Capsule, and kept it safe within a decorated wooden box for the next 1,000 years. And though the rest of the world eventually forgot the Ultra Heroes after going through such chaotic times, the Hoshino clan were able to keep many of the stories alive, believing them to be true. At some point, the Beta capsule was painted with golden strokes by one of Hoshino's overzealous descendants, but aside from that, the Beta capsule ended up surviving untouched until the year 3025. So, what does all this have to do with the main human character of my show? Well, the protagonist is the great, a bunch more greats grandson of Isamu Hoshino, named Shin Hoshino. His given name is notably the same as Shin Hayata, because Isamu Hoshino named his first son after Hayata, and thus Shin became an extremely common name among his descendants. Shin Hoshino is a good-hearted 21-year-old man who all the local children love, who lives with his grandfather and works on his farm, whose main flaw at the beginning of the series is that he's rather timid and a little underconfident. He has a habit of nervously biting his lip, especially before transforming into Ultraman Brave. Here's how he became capable of transforming. One night, he is visited by the ghost of Hayata and the other human hosts of the Ultra Brothers, who inform him that an Ultra with an urgent message for humanity has crash-landed on Earth, and now lies dead, or at least on the brink of death, in his travel sphere on his grandfather's property. Hayata tells the protagonist that the only way Ultraman Brave, and by extension humankind, can be saved is if he takes up the Beta capsule passed down through the generations of his family and revives him, by combining his life with that of the Ultra, just as Ultraman did for Hayata. The main character, understandably, is incredibly frightened by all this, and doesn't believe himself to be the right candidate for the job, due to his lack of courage. But Hayata insists that young Shin is the only person up to the task. The ghosts eventually take their leave, and Shin Hoshino is left to wonder what he should do. However, an incident that shocks the world ends up providing Shin Hoshino with the incentive to follow Hayata's advice. Japan is preparing to launch what they think is the very first rocket ship that will ever visit the moon, unaware that this has already occurred. But as the rocket prepares for liftoff, the sound of the vessel awakens a kaiju, who looks a lot like Gabara from the Godzilla series. We'll get to that in a minute. Who emerges from the ground, destroys the rocket ship on live TV, and begins to rampage. This is especially shocking to people because this show takes place in the World of the Land of Light timeline, which, as Ultra Galaxy Mega Monster Battle revealed back in 2007, is a timeline in which all the monsters on Earth went extinct after the events of Ultraman Mebius. But now, somehow, despite this, a kaiju has appeared. Hoshino watches this play out on his little television screen and realizes he is the only one who can stop the kaiju. He pulls the now ancient Beta capsule out of the box on his grandfather's mantle and rushes out to save the life of Ultraman Brave. Like in the original Ultraman, the two become a mostly single entity, and Shin Hoshino inherits all the memories of Brave, though his weaknesses remain. Because he now knows everything Brave does, later on, after fighting the Gabara-like monster, Hoshino is able to inform Japan of the approaching comet Suifon, telling them that Ultraman Brave told him about it. Upon hearing this and confirming it, the government decides to begin focusing as many resources as possible to find a way to prevent the Earth's destruction, and also creates a defense team known as EON, the Elite Operation Network, here's what their uniforms look like, whose mission is to find out why kaiju are suddenly starting to appear again, and to take them out when they pose a threat to humanity. Shin, of course, ends up joining EON. Let's pause the story here for a moment and look at the rest of the EON team. Two members of this squadron, both the captain Haruto Hosokawa and the main female character Toka Hisahara, who I named after this lady from the first Pegila episode of Ultra Q, get picked to be on the team for a rather silly reason. You know how I said all the Earth monsters went extinct in this timeline? Well, for my story, I'm going to slightly modify that and say that all the giant monsters went extinct, except for one that humanity assumed died but didn't, but we'll mention him later. But one small kaiju survived, namely Dynamite Joe's monster Peter from Ultra Q, who was discovered about 100 years before 3025 in his medium-sized form, who was taken to live happily in a zoo. Modern Ultraman shows seem to always need to have a cute and friendly monster or robot. Well, in the case of my show, Peter fills that role. People from all over like to come to this zoo to see the only surviving kaiju, and at the time of our story, Peter's caretakers were Haruto and Toka. Even though they barely know anything about kaiju other than Peter, they hilariously, at least I want it to be hilarious, end up getting recruited by the government when the Gabara-like monster attacks because they have a slight amount of experience with monsters and there is no one else to turn to. They end up being able to help out a little and are thus given positions on the EON team. The 64-year-old captain, Haruto, in his younger years, studied biology and was drafted into the Navy, where he worked as a marine mammal specialist for a short amount of time, prior to working at the zoo as one of Peter's caretakers. In my show, he begins as a bit of a comic relief incompetent captain, who over the course of the series goes on to become a much more serious and skilled leader. Toka is age 29 and worked at the zoo her entire adult life. She at first doesn't want to join Eon at all, but is convinced to stay after uncovering the monster Gezura's weakness. The other members of Eon are Masaru Orion, a brash and boisterous 34-year-old pilot who I named after Taro Orion from Ultra Q, Kagetora Kanda, the team's easygoing, patient weapons developer, and the bumbling, nervous Takuma Furukawa, who joins the team later on in the show and proves to be a very helpful asset to Eon due to his intimate knowledge of ages long ago. He appears to be 40, but is actually hundreds of years old. Not long before the apocalyptic event that wiped out a huge chunk of humanity, Furukawa had volunteered to be a test subject in a suspended animation experiment, in which he was put to sleep and sealed in a capsule while his vitals were constantly monitored. He was only supposed to be in there for 2 years, but while he was fast asleep, the huge disaster struck and his capsule was buried underground for hundreds of years. Furukawa was discovered perfectly preserved in his capsule by Eon and released into a completely unfamiliar world, just like what happened with Mummy Man and Ultraman, which this is a purposeful reference to. The capsule he was sealed in is also a reference, namely it's a callback to the capsules Aberrus and Benila were sealed in. The episodes of this show are intentionally jam-packed with references to past Ultraman shows, since it is an anniversary series after all. The first third and the third third of the show are mainly based on Ultraman and Ultra Q, with many returning monsters and story elements from these two shows in their big birthday year. My goal would be to include at least one reference to every episode of these two shows within these two thirds. The middle third of Ultraman Brave has references to the Ultra series as a whole, especially those in the Showa timeline, including Ultraman Mebius and the Ultra Galaxy shows. I would even have an episode based on the Redman series, in which Redman ends up on Earth thanks to a Baltan distortion and spends most of the episode trying to kill Peter, before Ultraman Brave is able to convince him the Kaiju isn't a threat. The majority of the episodes would be self-contained stories, as was the case with Showa-era episodes, but with lots of character development and occasional updates on the government's efforts to create a means to destroy Suifon. This Ultraman Brave concept is still a work in progress for me, and I still have a lot of work to do when it comes to planning out the middle episodes, but I know how the series begins and ends, so we can go over the episodes I've planned so far and look at what kaiju I've worked into the show already, and which ones I still need to work in but plan to include. Episode 1 includes basically everything I mentioned at the beginning of this synopsis, and ends with Shin Hoshino becoming Ultraman Brave for the first time. Hoshino also goes to the zoo with some local kids in the middle of this episode, so you are introduced to the zoo caretakers and Peter. In episode 2, we get to see Brave fight a monster for the first time, namely the Gabara-like monster Gabagon, who I created to reference the beginning of Ultraman's Showa era, when many of the Ultra Kaiju were created using Toho's suits. Gabagon is supposed to look like Tsuburaya Productions borrowed Toho's Gabara suit and modified it to create a new monster. The kaiju ends up escaping from Ultraman Brave when the military attacks the hero, believing him to be a threat. This episode also includes Hoshino informing the government about Suifon, the formation of Eon, the building of a temporary base for the team outside the zoo so they can study Peter, and the appearance of a second giant kaiju, confirming to humanity that monsters are somehow coming back. This second monster is the returning kaiju Mongula from Ultra Q, who was quite a bit larger in this appearance. Brave gets his first victory against Mongula. In episode 3, Shin Hoshino learns the hard way that finishing moves can't be spammed at the beginning of a battle, when he fights and ends up having to flee from the returning kaiju Gezura. Toka discovers Gezura's head fin weakness by studying the suspiciously similar Peter, and Brave is able to take out the chocolate-loving monster, using this knowledge in a rematch. Episode 4 is a Twilight Zone-y episode designed to remind viewers of the early Showa shows, featuring a new monster, Dezuler, who is quite weak but has the ability to completely confuse his opponents. At the end of the episode, after the monster is defeated, Eon remains so confused that they don't even know whether Dezuler actually appeared or not. In episode 5, Shin and Captain Haruto end up becoming stuck in an apartment building on the back of the monster Build Gamera, a very obscure kaiju who is currently exclusive to this game that's a prequel to Ultraman. Shin is unable to transform for a long time due to the captain being present. Episodes 6 and 7 are a two-parter, and in these episodes, Shin's slight cowardice really becomes a problem. He and Masaru Orion are tasked with saving a group of explorers trapped in the wilderness of the Middle East. Everywhere except Japan is pretty much wilderness now, by the way. The location these folks are stranded in turns out to be the now lush area where the civilization of Baraji once stood, and a bunch of kaiju have suddenly showed up in this area fighting over the fragmented remains of the blue stone of Baraji, creating a new lawless monster zone. Unfortunately, I don't really have time to go into much detail about this two-parter, but Shin's fears return after getting beat up by a Red King with horns, until the ghost of Hayata returns and relates to him the story of how he reunited with Brave's teacher, Ultraman, after the events of Farewell Ultraman, and how lost he felt before their reunion. This story inspires Shin enough to get over his fears for now, and take out the most powerful kaiju in this area, who had just destroyed the Horned Red King, a one-winged Chandlar. Yep, the same Chandlar from so long ago ended up surviving and became incredibly powerful over the next 1,000 years. Powerful enough to destroy the monster who tore his wing off, but not powerful enough to defeat Brave. Gorgos and a new ape monster called Munga also appear in this two-parter. I've worked out a lot less about most of the episodes after this. Episode 8 features Ultraman Brave having to fight a giant man, enlarged by the butterfly morphos from Ultra Q, because I thought it'd be cool to have an Ultra fight a giant human. And in episode 9, G-Ross makes his grand return to the Showa timeline, in an episode that is supposed to capture the feel of the old Showa-era kaiju feature films. I also want to somehow work Muroroa, Ghostron, Varicane, and possibly Orphe into the show as well. But I'll think more about which non-Ultraman and Ultra Q monsters I'm adding in when I start fleshing out the middle third of the episodes. Okay, I'm about to finish up by telling you about how the show ends, but first I just wanted to briefly tell you about the presentation of this series. I want it to recapture the feel of the older Showa shows as much as possible, by, for example, having much more unique looking sets, and featuring a narrator who speaks regularly, which we haven't had for a while. Also, sometimes remastered music from the soundtracks of the older shows, especially Ultraman, would play, and new tracks would be arranged to match the old style. Alright, let's move on to looking at the last 4 episodes of Ultraman Brave. So, near the end of the series, Eon stumbles upon the buried, long-abandoned headquarters of the SSSP, and within the building they discover the remains of the original Zeton that took out Ultraman, which were seemingly being used to create some kind of powerful weapon before the headquarters was abandoned. The government ends up taking this device and modifying it to create a giant piece of equipment for Ultraman Brave to wear, which they say will enhance his spacium beam to such an extent that he should be able to destroy the comet Suifon. It's completed just a few days before Suifon's return, and Eon, Ultraman Brave, and the government gather to begin the operation to destroy the comet. Brave dons the Zeton-powered armament and is suddenly brought to his knees by an intense pain that surges through his body. The armor was a trap set for him. The perpetrators then reveal themselves. Turns out a bunch of aliens whose invasions had been thwarted by Ultras in the past had infiltrated the government and created this device to trap Brave, the student of the Ultra who prevented their invasions, so they could force him to watch helplessly as the Earth was destroyed by Suifon, to get revenge on the Ultras, particularly Ultraman, even at the cost of going down with the Earth in the process. However, one alien among them, Alien Mephilos, the same one who came to Earth in Ultraman, I refuse to say the Mephilos that died in Ultraman Taro was him, still wants to win the Earth peacefully, and ends up backstabbing the vengeful aliens and freeing Brave, before attempting to once again convince a child to give him the Earth. Upon failing once again, this time Alien Mephilos finally concedes defeat, and promises to destroy the comet Suifon himself with his planet's incredibly advanced technology, as a sign of respect to Earthlings. By the way, Mephilos has secretly been present throughout the whole show in a human disguise, as Eon's staff officer, waiting for the other aliens in the government to reveal themselves so he could thwart their plans. Mephilos does indeed destroy Suifon, but little does he know that within this comet lies an even greater threat. A gigantic, bloodthirsty, planet-destroying, Durako-like kaiju also named Suifon, who instantly destroys Mephilos and his ship, and proceeds to fly toward Earth. If the idea of this monster sounds familiar to you, that's because, well, I have a confession to make. When I first came up with the idea of Ultraman Brave and Suifon coming back, I was super excited and thought I'd come up with a super original idea. But some months later, I was disappointed to learn that an Ultraman story themed around the return of Suifon already exists, namely the anime Ultraman Super Fighter Legend. This was upsetting, but after thinking about it, I thought, oh well, my story is really different, and I also decided, why don't I just embrace that there is a small aspect of these two stories that's similar, and draw inspiration from this other one? After all, this show had the really cool idea of having a super powerful monster living inside the comet, named Suifon. So my show has the Suifon monster too, though my version looks and behaves quite a bit differently. I haven't designed him yet, but I intend to make him look somewhat like Power Durako. He has the ability to cause whoever catches sight of him, be it man or monster, to instantly become filled with utter terror and become paralyzed in fear, as well as the power to engulf huge areas in darkness. So, Suifon heads toward Earth, determined to destroy it despite no longer having his comet car. Meanwhile, back on our home planet, Eon has finally found out why Kaiju have suddenly returned despite being extinct. This show retroactively asserts that the monster chief Geronimon, who can revive monsters, is tied in some way to the comet Suifon, which is why he appeared soon after Suifon passed the first time. So, the comet's return ended up reviving Geronimon, and Geronimon in turn began reviving as many Kaiju as he could to rebuild his monster army. Eon is able to root Geronimon out and destroy him a second time, and they think the Earth is now safe at last. And then Suifon arrives. The horrific Kaiju ends up making itself even more powerful by absorbing both the original Zetton's DNA from the device the aliens built and Geronimon's DNA from the monster chief's corpse, becoming the incredibly powerful ZG Suifon. All of humanity, including Eon, is helpless against this threat and can only scream in horror, but one human is able to keep his head, the main character, Shin Hoshino, who started the series out as a nervous wreck. You see, throughout the course of the show, Shin had to face his extreme fears so many times that by the end, even though he is hardly less scared in this circumstance than he was previously, he's learned that bravery isn't a lack of fear. It's pushing through even when horribly frightened. And since he's had to push through so many more times than anyone else, he is the only one able to do so. And only now does it become evident why the human hosts of the Ultra Brothers insisted that he was the man for the job at the beginning of the series. Turns out they were right. But just because Shin and Ultraman Brave are able to fight doesn't mean the battle's in the bag. On the contrary, the now super-powered Kaiju quickly overwhelms Brave, and using his new Geronimon powers, revives several Kaiju as terrifying versions of themselves called Screamer Kaiju to further overpower Brave. Things look bleak, but then, when all hope seems lost, suddenly the Ultra Brothers arrive from the Land of Light. Alien Methalos didn't die in vain, because when the comet Suifon was destroyed, the blood field preventing travel to Earth vanished, and now the Ultra Brothers are able to come to the planet's assistance. However, even they cannot approach the terrifying ZG Suifon, so instead they take out the Screamer Kaiju and provide their courageous brother-in-arms with a huge amount of energy so he can try to finally destroy the menace. After an extremely hard-fought, epic final battle, Brave at last comes out on top, ending the threat of Suifon once and for all, and humanity is saved, being freed from the monster's spell of terror. And yep, that's my fanfiction Ultraman series, students. I hope you found this interesting. If a lot of you end up enjoying this video, maybe I'll make a sequel once I've worked out more of the plot. Be sure to let me know if you'd like to see another video like this in the comments. I appreciate your feedback. In conclusion, thank you all not only for helping the channel get to 25k subs, but also for sending in so much great fan art. I try to include at least one picture from every person who sent something in. If I accidentally missed including one of your pictures, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to include the art in an upcoming video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out my eBay store where I sell a bunch of different Tokusatsu toys, and my Teespring store filled with Toku Professor merch. And with that, it looks like our 25k celebration has come to an end.
No, it hasn't. Not by any means.
It hasn't? What do you mean?
Don't tell me you forgot. You promised you were going to teach a history lesson on a famous monster as part of the 25k celebration. Yeah, and that students would get to vote for the one they wanted.
Ah, good. Glad to hear you were paying attention. That's what I wanted to know.
This is something you're actually doing, right?
Yep.
Yes! Which monsters will we be able to vote for?
Here are your choices, students.